9 out of every 10 AI apps launched this year are expected to be dead before it ends. Most of them will never make a single dollar. And yet, in the exact same market, a guy working alone from a laptop is pulling in around $300,000 a month from one tiny AI tool that does basically nothing impressive. Same technology. Same year. Same wide open market. One side is a graveyard. The other side is printing money quietly. The difference between them is not talent, it is not funding, and it is not some secret model nobody else has access to. It comes down to a single rule, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it in any successful AI business. So let me show you the graveyard first, because the failures are where the rule actually hides. Here is the uncomfortable data. Industry analysts now estimate that roughly 90% of AI wrapper startups, meaning apps built on top of someone else's model like a thin layer over a large language model, will fail by the end of 2026. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of them generate zero revenue. Not low revenue. Zero. And of the ones that survive, only about 2 to 5% ever cross $10,000 a month. There is another brutal detail underneath this. These wrapper businesses tend to run at gross margins of only around 25 to 35%, because they are paying for every single AI call. Compare that to traditional software, which often runs at 70 to 85% margins. So most of these founders are building a business that is both unlikely to make money and expensive to run even if it does. It sounds hopeless. But hold that thought, because the survivors are not playing the same game at all. Now meet the opposite of that statistic. A developer named Danny Postma launched a product in March of 2023 called HeadshotPro. The idea is almost insultingly simple. You upload some selfies, and the AI gives you professional-looking headshots for things like LinkedIn. That's it. No revolutionary technology. No new model. Just a wrapper around image generation pointed at one specific use case. Within roughly 2 weeks of launch, reports say it had already cleared $100,000. Within about a year it was doing around $300,000 a month, which works out to roughly $3.6 million a year, and for a long stretch he ran it essentially solo before eventually adding a small team. So sit with the contradiction for a second. The market is a graveyard. The technology is a commodity anyone can copy in a weekend. And yet this one app became a cash machine. The question is not what tool he used. The question is what he refused to do. And that refusal is the entire rule. Here is the rule, stated plainly. The winners never sell a feature. They sell a narrow, boring, expensive problem already being solved. HeadshotPro did not launch as an AI image generator. If it had, it would be one of 10,000 identical tools fighting over the same scraps. Instead it solved one specific, slightly embarrassing pain that millions of people have, which is that they need a decent professional photo and they hate spending a few $100s and an afternoon at a photo studio to get one. That is the magic word, by the way. Boring. The most profitable AI businesses solve boring, repeating pain with something that is roughly 10 times better, faster, or cheaper than the old way. They do not try to amaze you with novelty. They quietly remove an annoying line item from your life or your work. The general advice you hear, build an AI app, is exactly why most people fail. The winners pick a target so specific it sounds too small to matter. And the smaller and more annoying the problem, the more people will quietly pay to make it disappear. Now watch what happens when you point that same rule at businesses instead of consumers. When you aim the narrow rule at expensive industries, the numbers get much bigger. Take Harvey, an AI tool built specifically for legal work. It is, in a sense, also a wrapper. But it does not sell itself as artificial intelligence. It sells itself as the thing that removes hours of grinding, high-paid legal labor. Reports put it at around $75 million in annual recurring revenue with a valuation in the billions. Why does the legal version dwarf the consumer version? Because the same narrow rule has a hidden multiplier attached to it, and the multiplier is the value of the time you are saving. Analysts describe the best niches with two traits, high transaction value and high manual overhead. Translation: find work where every task is worth a lot of money and currently eats a lot of expensive human hours. Law. Finance. Real estate. Specialized medical paperwork. In those worlds, an AI tool is not a gimmick, it is replacing a bill that already runs into the thousands, which means you can charge real money for it instead of begging for a $9 subscription. Niche selection alone can swing your outcome by 5 to 20 times. Same effort. Wildly different ceiling. And there is a third version of this rule that is even bigger, because sometimes the narrow problem is hiding inside a giant company's spreadsheet. Here is where it stops being about scrappy founders and starts being about billion-dollar shifts. A large fashion retailer reportedly ran a pilot using AI-generated model imagery for its product pages, and the result was a roughly 340% jump in product page conversion, which they tied to something on the order of $127 million in additional annual revenue. Why? Look at the boring math underneath it. Traditional product photography can cost somewhere between $85 and $250 per item once you count the model, the studio, and the editing. The AI version can deliver a comparable image for roughly $3 to $12. That is not a small improvement. That is the cost collapsing by 90+% on a task every online store has to do thousands of times. Forecasts suggest the vast majority of fashion e-commerce operators will be using virtual or AI-generated imagery by late this year. So the exact same rule that made one guy $300,000 a month is quietly rewriting how billion-dollar retailers operate. Narrow problem. Expensive old way. 10 times cheaper new way. Every single time. So let's turn this into something you can actually use. Here is the filter the survivors run before they build anything, and you can steal it right now. First, do not start with the technology, start with a painful, repetitive task that someone is already paying real money or real hours to deal with. If nobody is currently paying to solve it, the AI version will not magically create demand. Second, narrow it until it feels almost too small. Not photos, professional headshots. Not legal AI, contract review for a specific kind of firm. The narrower the wedge, the easier it is to be the obvious best choice instead of the 10th identical option. Third, check the math of the old way. If the thing you are replacing costs a few dollars, your ceiling is low and your margins will get crushed by AI costs. If it replaces a few hundred or a few $1,000s of human work, you can charge enough to actually build a business. Painful problem, narrow wedge, expensive old way. That is the whole filter. Almost nobody who fails ever runs it. Almost everyone who wins runs it without even thinking, because it is just obvious to them. So go back to the contradiction from the start. 90% of AI apps dying, and a solo founder pulling $300,000 a month with the same commodity technology. It was never a technology gap. The losers fell in love with the AI and asked what cool thing they could build. The winners fell in love with a boring, expensive, annoying problem and asked what they could quietly delete from someone's life. The model is the same for everyone now. It is basically free and available to anyone reading this. Which means the only edge left is the problem you choose to point it at. That is genuinely good news, because choosing well costs nothing but attention. If breaking down the real mechanics behind these businesses is useful to you, consider subscribing, because this channel does exactly this every single day, one case study and one repeatable pattern at a time. And next time you see a flashy new AI demo, ask the only question that actually predicts the money. What boring, expensive problem does this quietly make disappear? If there isn't one, you already know which side of that 90% it lands on.